This is my first model railway and my first YouTube contribution, so anything could go right. My small layout includes a stretch of London Underground, but I haven't so far found any guidance on laying the third and fourth rails, so I thought it would be easy. It is now, but starting was slow. Usual disclaimer, read trade names, etc. It's always possible to do things by eye, but I prefer to try and get a good result on the layout now and again. The video relates to 00. The components concerned are very small, and hence the video will be quite difficult to follow on its own. I suggest you buy a packet of Pico conductor rail chairs IL120 and a pack of conductor rail IL1. Total cost a few pounds. Having these in front of you will instantly make the video clearer. The rail chairs were a bit of a nightmare to fit begin with, but I have overcome the problem as explained in the video. First off, examine your track for missing or loose sleepers and rectify. The rail chairs will be mounted at even intervals along the track. Decide which sleepers will carry the rail chairs. Pico say every fourth sleeper, perhaps every fifth, looks better. Make marks showing which sleepers are to be drilled. Sometimes for various reasons it's not possible to stick to the every fourth or fifth sleeper rule, but occasional slight variations neither affect the assembly or the rigidity or the appearance, in my view. Use something square to butt up against the sleeper ends to ensure the mark is pretty accurate, i.e. 90 degrees, and the mark should be, say, 10 to 15 mil long. A piece of small angle strip would be fine, cut square. For southern region tracks, just the third rail is required on the outside of the running rail itself. But for London Underground, you need a fourth rail as well, between the running rails. I believe that the chairs for the fourth rail should be spaced as for the third rail, but midway between the third rail chairs. It's necessary to make a small jig to ensure the holes you are now going to drill to hold the rail chairs are perfectly parallel to the running rails, and indeed so that the end of one conductor rail butts up against the next one. I made my jig from two pieces of styrene, each about 50 mil long. The lower piece is the same as the width between the running rails, and the top piece is the same width as the sleeper ends. The two pieces are glued together and finished off with a piece of brass the same size as the larger piece of styrene. Now carefully drill the jig with a 1 mil bit in a Dremel drill, so there is one hole immediately above the centre point of the bit of sleeper projecting beyond the running rail. In other words, the hole is to be made between the two edges of the sleeper and halfway between the running rail and the end of the sleeper. The other hole for the fourth rail is about a third of the distance between the inside of the running rails. After drilling, I use an old broken 1 mil drill bit to check the hole is clear as swarf. 5 mil deep is plenty. Care re plastic building up on the drill bit. It can make the holes oversized. These two holes in the jig will be used hundreds of times in even a small layout, hence the metal top plate for the jig. Score a mark at 90 degrees to each hole. This will be used to line up against the marks already made at the end of the sleepers. Now use the jig to drill the holes in the previously marked sleepers and also the holes between the running rails for the fourth rail. I suggest you do about 12 inches of conductor rail at a time and measure carefully where the conductor chairs will be sited, thus determining the exact length of the conductor rail to be laid. I suggest that you lay approximately 12 inches of conductor rail at a time. The longer the piece of rail, the more difficult it becomes to hold the chairs in place prior to gluing. Careful measurement of the length of the conductor rail is required before cutting. We come now to fixing the conductor chairs. I hold the conductor rail upside down in the vise. I use a special vise, special in that it is mounted at elbow height rather than bench height, as I find this easier to work like that, and the vise holds a second vise for the fine work now to be done. Carefully chamfer both rail ends in all directions so as to minimise catching the rail in your sleeve years hence, or even half an hour later, as well as, and this is important, aiding the fitting of the rail chairs, which is the next step. Pico envisioned freeing the rail chairs from the sprue so as to paint them and then fitting them to the rail. After an hour struggling to mount grains of plastic on a wobbly handheld rail, it struck me it would be better to attach the rail chairs to the rail whilst still on the sprue and then cut them off. Presto! Quicker than hey presto. So you hold the rail upside down in the vise, leaving say 30 mm of rail projecting from the end of the vise, and attach each rail chair, upside down of course, cutting each one free of the sprue in turn. Ensure that the uppermost part of the moulding is cut very close to the sprue. This part of the moulding becomes the peg which goes into the holes you have drilled, and if the peg is short, it probably will not locate in the hole. Check the number of holes you have drilled to hold this rail, and attach an equal number of rail chairs to the rail. Being cautious, I attach an extra rail chair to the rail, just in case anything goes wrong. It's easier to discard the surplus peg than try to fit a replacement. If a chair fails to fit, do as you would with a failed track pin. Store it immediately in a suitable receptacle. Now lay the conductor rail next to the track and slide the rail chairs up and down until they all match the positions of the holes in the sleepers. Push home the first 4 or 5 rail chairs and now superglue the pegs in place. Perhaps naughty, but if I cannot see the resultant splodges of glue and the rail stays stuck in place, happy bunny. When definitely dried, go back and glue the other pegs similar wise. I use Loctite superglue with the Control dispenser. Now we've dealt with straightforward track, but there are a few notes about non-standard fits. What we've already done works well even when laying moderate curves, but if you're doing something like a small radius Pico set track, the geometry is against you. The scribed line on the jig will result in the jig's hole being on the edge of the sleeper, not in the middle. I overcame this by making a second jig with the lowest piece filed to shape between the curved running rails and the jig holes established by trial and error. If, however, there are just a few standard curves, but many more one-off curves, it may be better to proceed by substituting the 1 mil drill bit with a 1.5 mil bit and then using a bit more super glue, or by just drilling by sight, again with an oversized bit. One thing to watch for is that the end of a conductor rail which is curved should, if possible, be straight beyond the curve so that the end butts up against the next conductor rail nice and smooth. Obviously, it's necessary to bend the conductor rails to shape following the running rails. I have a special Myford vise which enables me to hold the bent rail steady, ready to attach the rail chairs, but doubtless other means of holding the rail will be just as good, e.g. facing the vice jaws with balsa wood, etc. Then the subject of points. A special, very short jig would be needed, or given some practice with straight track, you can probably get away with drilling the holes by eye. I'm sure that others will have their own simpler methods of doing this job, but owing to a lack of skills, I'm a great believer in using jigs. My thanks go to my granddaughters Charlie and Georgia, who made the video, allowing me to concentrate on mumbling the words and dropping bits on the floor. Thank you for watching.